autumn evening drifted slowly through the modern yet cold house nestled in a quiet Portland suburb. In the minimalist dining room, white lights poured over a long table where only 3 chairs were ever used. The twins, Emma and Ethan, sat across from each other, silently pushing their food around their plates. The meals remained nearly untouched. Daniel, a single father and once awarded architect, stood near the doorway. Leaning against the wooden frame, his phone buzzing repeatedly in his hand. He didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the children. 6 months. It had been 6 months since his wife, Lily, passed away. And for just as long, family dinners had become silent battles between sorrow and survival. "I'm not hungry," Emma murmured, setting her fork down. "Me neither," Ethan echoed, his eyes locked on the table. Daniel sat down with a heavy sigh, helpless. When the doorbell rang, no one moved. He stood up and walked to the door, where a woman stood waiting with a gentle smile and an old cloth bag. "Hello, I'm Clara," she said. "I'm here for the nanny position." She arrived just as the silence around the table had turned into something heavier than words, a quiet protest against the emptiness Lily left behind. He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing something unspoken. Then, without a word, he gave a subtle nod and stepped aside to let her in. Clara stepped into the chilly space with an oddly calming presence. She sat down at the dining table, setting her cloth bag beside the chair. She didn't rush, didn't intrude. Emma and Ethan glanced at her cautiously, their eyes reflecting a quiet fear that this stranger might disturb the fragile balance they had built in this house. Daniel stood back by the doorway, watching but staying silent. He'd seen many nannies try to manage the kids, with logic, commands, or fake cheerfulness. But Clara wasn't like the others. She simply existed. "Emma, Ethan," she said softly, her voice like a whisper. "May I ask you something?" Emma nodded faintly. Ethan followed. "Do you like caramel pudding?" Emma blinked. "Yes." "And herb butter cookies?" "Yes." Ethan replied quickly, a slight glimmer in his eyes. Clara smiled gently. "So you do feel hungry. You just don't want to eat what's on these plates?" The two exchanged a look. Then Emma lowered her head while Ethan slowly nodded. "I see," Clara said, her voice like sharing a secret. "Is it maybe because you're waiting for someone to eat with?" Ethan pressed his lips together. Emma clenched her hands, her eyes turning red. "I don't want Mom to be left out," Emma murmured. "Left out?" Daniel repeated, stepping closer. "What if she comes back and there's nothing left?" Ethan whispered. "She'll be sad." "She might be really hungry," Emma added, pulling an old handkerchief from her pocket. "So we're saving food for her." Clara said nothing at first. She just looked at the children with a softness that held their grief without fear. She could feel the pure love fighting quietly against the weight of loss. Emma stood up and left the table. A few minutes later, she returned with a worn-out shoebox. She carefully opened the lid and placed it on the table. Inside were small plastic containers, a few spoonfuls of cold rice, half a slice of bread, a stale cookie, all wrapped neatly in plastic film. Each item felt like a memory. Clara froze. Daniel's fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. "For Mommy," Emma whispered. "When she comes back, she'll need to eat." Clara knelt beside the table, bringing herself to their eye level. "May I say something, if that's okay?" They both nodded. "I believe if your mom is watching from the stars, she'd want to see you happy, strong, and full of laughter again. That would be her peace. She'd want you to enjoy your meals, laugh again, and grow strong, because that would give her peace. If we get too skinny, she'll worry," Ethan mumbled. "Exactly," Clara said with a soft smile. "And you know what? Every time you eat, you can imagine it's making her happy wherever she is." Emma looked at her, lips trembling. "Really?" "I believe so." Daniel looked at Clara, this stranger who had just touched a truth he hadn't been able to reach in 6 long months. Something within him stirred, like a spark catching fire in the dead of winter. Daniel didn't cry, but something in his chest cracked open, quietly. For the first time in months, hope didn't feel like betrayal. In just one meeting, Clara had reached the deepest corners of his children's grief, places he'd been unable to touch for 6 long months. With a gentleness that seemed almost instinctive, she had managed to get them to eat again, just a single spoonful, but to him, it felt like a miracle. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep, not because of grief, but because for the first time in months, he'd felt a shift, small, almost invisible, but real. The next morning, the air in the house hadn't completely lifted, but something had shifted, just slightly. It felt lighter, less heavy. Daniel woke up early, not because of work, but because he couldn't stop thinking about the conversation from the night before. When he walked into the kitchen, he found Clara already there. She was arranging a row of spice jars she'd brought from Georgia, each labeled by hand: cinnamon, clove, thyme, bay leaves, and one he didn't recognize: marjoram. "You brought your whole kitchen with you?" he asked, smiling. "Just the memories," Clara replied, her voice as warm as the cinnamon lingering in the air. "The kitchen was the first place I ever felt safe." Emma and Ethan walked in, still groggy, but something about the scent in the air drew them toward the table. "What smells so good?" Emma asked, approaching the glass jars. "Marjoram," Clara answered, offering her a sniff. "Smells like ginger candy," Ethan said with surprise. Clara looked at them gently. "Today, I'm going to teach you how to make cornmeal cookies. Would you like to help?" "But we don't know how to cook," Emma said nervously. "That's okay, I'll show you," Clara smiled. "We'll start with the smallest things. Just like love, it starts with the tiniest bits." Daniel stood at the doorway, silently watching the scene unfold. Clara showing Emma how to stir the dough, Ethan cracking eggs into a bowl. In the thin morning light, the kitchen, once just a place for reheating meals, suddenly felt like the heart of their home. The smell of baking flour filled the air, laughter echoed, bits of dough landed on shirts, cheeks, even the floor, but no one cared. For the first time in months, Daniel heard his children truly happy. "Dad, do you want to try one?" Emma ran toward him with a warm cookie in hand. Daniel smiled and took it. The flavor was simple, rustic, but somehow richer than anything he'd tasted at the finest restaurants. "This is delicious," he said honestly. "Who taught you to make this?" "Miss Clara," Emma beamed. "She says cooking is a way to remember the people we love." Daniel looked at Clara. She was laughing with Ethan, unaware that, in her quiet way, she was changing everything. After eating cookies with the kids, Daniel lingered in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, quietly watching Clara as she cleaned up. Late morning sunlight spilled across her face, calm, patient, and distant. He had never met anyone quite like her, gentle with the children, yet carrying something quietly lonely in her eyes. "Have you worked with kids for a long time?" Daniel asked, trying to sound casual. "Not that long," Clara replied with a soft smile, not looking up. "Actually, I used to be a chef. I had plans to open a small restaurant back in Georgia. I had even picked the name Grandma's Table." She paused briefly, then continued. My fiance and I built the whole concept together, but 2 months before the wedding, he said he wasn't sure anymore, that he needed time." Daniel didn't say anything, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he could hear the tear in her voice, a wound not yet healed. "So I packed my things and came here," Clara said, washing her hands at the sink. "I figured I needed to start over somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere people wouldn't look at me and see the girl who got left at the altar. And instead, they see you as the nanny who's not that great but makes decent cookies," she chuckled. Daniel laughed too, but something tugged at his chest. Some people walk into your life gently, but carry with them the weight of an entire world that once collapsed. Clara was one of those people. Her story lingered in the air long after it ended, like the scent of cinnamon on an empty plate. That afternoon, Clara prepared dinner with Emma and Ethan. While the twins argued over which vegetables to add to the soup, Daniel stood at the kitchen doorway again, as if that spot had become his safest place to watch from. Before, the kitchen had been a place for reheating frozen meals or making rushed coffee. But now, it was different. The laughter, the scent of herbs, the steam rising from the pot, all of it made the space feel alive again. The kitchen wasn't just cooking anymore. It was rekindling memories, stitching a broken family back together. "Dad, do you want to peel carrots with me?" Ethan looked up. Daniel hesitated. "It's been a long time since I cooked." "That's okay. Miss Clara says we can start with small things," Emma added. "Carrots aren't scary." Clara handed him a knife and a cutting board. Her eyes smiled, though she said nothing. Daniel sat at the table and began slicing the carrots, clumsily but with effort. "You're really good at this," he said softly once the kids got busy chatting again. "I haven't seen my kids laugh like that since Lily died." Clara didn't respond immediately. She just stirred the pot and then said gently, "Children don't need grand gestures. They just need to feel safe, heard, and sometimes a warm scent from the kitchen is enough to feel loved." Daniel stayed quiet. He looked down at his hands, awkward, unsure, but somehow real. "Thayer." "Yes." "Thank you for this." She smiled, nodded slightly, then turned back to the soup. But something had shifted in her eyes. A quiet understanding that didn't need words. That night, they had dinner together for the first time in months. No one had to be asked, no one forced a smile. Emma talked about school. Ethan told a story about being teased for bringing weird cookies. Daniel laughed, then shared about a new project he was designing, something he hadn't talked about at dinner since forever. Clara listened quietly, occasionally offering seconds. She didn't sit at the center of the table, yet somehow she was holding the rhythm of it all. And Daniel looked at her, not with gratitude, not because she helped with the kids, but with the eyes of a man who, for the first time, believed that maybe, just maybe, he could start again. After dinner, Clara cleaned up with Emma and Ethan. Daniel offered to help, but the kids quickly shooed him away with a sweet excuse. "You need to rest, Dad. You've got work early tomorrow." He chuckled and stepped back, leaning quietly in the hallway, just watching. Clara washed dishes, Emma dried the cutlery, Ethan stacked everything into drawers. The three of them moved like a well-rehearsed trio. Simple gestures filled the kitchen, not just with light, but with a sense of belonging. "Miss Clara?" Emma said, suddenly pausing. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you our new mom?" Clara froze. Ethan looked up at his sister, then turned to Clara, waiting for an answer. Daniel, from the hallway, felt his heart skip a beat. "I'm not your mom, sweetie, but I'll love you just as fiercely, and I'll always be here if you need me." Emma frowned. "But you bake like Mommy, and you smile like her too." "I do," Clara gave a soft laugh, her eyes already glistening. "I just wish Mommy would come back. But if she doesn't, I want you to stay." Daniel closed his eyes. Emma's words, so innocent yet piercingly wise, went straight through the quiet walls he had built around his heart. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Daniel stepped out into the backyard. The moon hovered above the roof. He wondered when Clara had started showing up in his thoughts this often. Not as an employee, not just as a caregiver, but as something familiar. And yet, his heart hesitated, because somewhere in this house, Lily still lingered. In the photo frames, in Emma's occasional laugh that sounded just like her mother's, in all the unfinished conversations. Daniel wasn't ready. But he knew one thing. Clara had touched a part of him no one had reached in a long, long time. The following week passed peacefully. Clara continued cooking, driving the kids to school, helping them with homework, and telling bedtime stories from Georgia. Daniel slowly began to soften. He came home earlier, shared more dinners. And each time, his eyes lingered on Clara just a little longer, until Saturday morning. Emma woke up pale, lips dry, and with a high fever. Clara checked her temperature, 101.3 DEFF. She gently laid the girl back in bed, prepared a cool cloth, and tried to stay calm. She knocked on Daniel's office door. Behind it was a man with dark circles, scruffy beard, and red, sleep-deprived eyes. "What is it?" he asked hoarsely, voice edged with impatience. "Emma has a high fever. I think we should take her in." Daniel frowned. "What did she eat yesterday?" "Chicken soup, cornbread cookies," Clara answered, confused. "Southern food, spices, right." He stood up abruptly. "I knew something like this would happen." "What are you saying?" Clara's voice trembled. "Do you think I hurt your daughter?" Daniel's chest rose and fell rapidly. "I don't know anymore. Everything's changed so fast. Strange food, strange flavors, a stranger in our house." Each word struck like a needle. Clara froze, wounded. Her eyes filled with quiet pain. "I only wanted to help," she said softly. "I never thought you'd question that." I'm scared," he confessed, stepping back. "I already lost Lily. I can't lose anything else." The car moved quietly along the misty road, streetlights reflecting off the fogged windshield. Inside, the silence was thick. Emma was still asleep, resting her head on Clara's lap. Daniel drove, eyes on the road, but his mind was far from it. The doctor's words echoed in his head. "Just a common virus, nothing to do with the food." Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter. He had never felt this small because he had doubted someone like Clara, and worse, because deep down, he knew the issue had never been about the food. "Clara?" he said softly, breaking the silence. She didn't answer, only held Emma a little closer and kept staring out the window. "I'm not afraid of the food," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "I'm afraid of my feelings for you." Clara turned to look at him. Her eyes didn't show surprise, only quiet understanding. "You came into my house, into my children's lives, and I started feeling hope again. That terrified me." "Because of Lily?" Clara asked, her voice no louder than a whisper. Daniel nodded. "I loved her deeply. Losing her, I thought I'd never love again. But then you arrived, and I felt..." Clara took a deep breath. "Feelings aren't wrong, but silence and doubt, those leave real scars." Daniel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I know, and I'm scared. Scared that if I let myself love again, I'll lose it all. Again." For the first time, he admitted it, not just to her, but to himself. Even after Daniel's confession, the fog in Clara's heart didn't lift. His words were like a candle flickering in a storm, warm, but not strong enough to dispel the sting of doubt and hurt. That night, she said nothing, and by morning, she began to pack. Clara folded her clothes slowly into a suitcase. Each crease felt like a quiet goodbye. She had entered this house a stranger, but now, leaving felt like tearing a piece of her heart away. Ethan was the first to notice. He stood quietly at the door, watching her. "Where are you going?" "I got a new job, sweetheart, with another family," Clara answered softly. "We need you," he whispered. Emma ran in moments later, still pale from her fever, her eyes lighting up, then darkening as she saw the suitcase. "No," she cried, "you can't go. You're part of our family now." Her shout pulled Daniel from his office. He stopped at the door, frozen by the sight of his two children clinging to Clara like they were afraid she might vanish. "Please, don't go," he said, voice breaking. Clara looked at him, torn between softening and protecting herself. "I don't know if I still belong here." "You do," he stepped closer. "You're not just the person who cared for my kids. You're the one who brought this family back to life." Clara turned away, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Daniel, I'm not sure I'm strong enough to love someone who isn't ready." "But you already do, don't you?" he whispered. She didn't answer, and in that silence was the clearest answer of all. Daniel didn't let Clara walk away. Silence hung between them, thick with words unsaid. Then, as Clara turned, Daniel took a step, not toward goodbye, but toward something braver. He didn't give a grand speech, didn't make perfect promises. He simply stepped forward, stood in front of her, awkward but honest. "If you leave now," he said, "I'll lose someone else who means the world to me, And this time, I don't think I can handle it." Clara turned away, her shoulders trembling slightly. Daniel didn't move closer. He just continued, slowly, as if learning how to name the feelings in his heart. "I never thought I could love again. After Lily died, everything felt like a blank space. I couldn't see, I couldn't feel, until you came." His voice cracked. "It's not because you cook. It's not because you care for my kids. It's because you live. You live with them with a real heart. And that reminded me that I used to live like that too." Clara looked at him. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she whispered, "Daniel, what about Lily?" "Lily is always here," he said, placing a hand on his chest, "but not to hold me back. She's here to remind me, love doesn't end. It just changes form." He stepped closer, gently resting a hand on her suitcase. "Don't go. Stay. Not because the kids need you, but because I do. I need you not as a replacement, but as the person you are." Clara clenched her hands. She had never been looked at like that before, not with pleading, not with control, but with truth. She exhaled, trembling yet lighter. "Okay, I will think about it." Before Clara could leave the room, the two children threw their arms around her. Ethan hugged her waist tightly, and Emma clung to her hand as if afraid she might disappear. "You're really not leaving?" Ethan asked, his eyes shimmering. Clara laughed through her tears and nodded. "No, I'm staying." "Then, can you be our new mom?" Emma asked innocently. "You feel like family already." Clara froze for a second. The word mom rang in her heart like a soft melody. Then she pulled them both into her arms. "If that's what you want, then I'd be honored." Daniel stood at the doorway, his heart wrapped in something unfamiliar, something warm and trembling. He had never thought he'd love again, let alone propose to someone in the middle of a hallway, suitcase half packed, eyes still wet with tears. But he had never felt more certain of anything. He stepped forward, kneeling down beside them. "Clara," he said, voice shaky, "you've brought laughter, warmth, and love back into this house. Don't just stay in this house. Stay in our story, in our lives. Will you be part of this family forever?" Clara's eyes widened and Emma whispered, "Daddy's proposing." They all burst into laughter. Clara covered her face, overwhelmed. "I don't even have a wedding dress," she whispered. "I don't have a ring," Daniel smiled. "But I have this heart, and it's yours." She nodded, tears glistening but filled with joy. Then, yes. That late afternoon, laughter echoed through the house, and for the first time in a long time, it was filled with something more precious than anything else, a true sense of home. From that day on, the suitcase stayed packed away, and love, though not perfect, began to root itself meal after meal, day after day. A year after Clara said yes to staying, the little house at the end of the street wore a new look, not just with paint, but with a warmth that glowed from within. Clara moved gently through the kitchen, one hand resting on her baby bump, the other adjusting a vase of fresh flowers. "Ethan, did you wipe all the tables?" "All done, Mom," he called back, his face dusted with flour. "Can I help too?" Emma ran up, her twin braids bouncing like little wings. Clara laughed. "Bring the menus to the tables, sweetie." Their small restaurant, Grandma's Flavor, had only been open for 2 months, but it had already become a beloved spot in the neighborhood. Every dish was a piece of Clara's childhood, recipes from her grandmother's kitchen. Daniel walked out carrying a tray of pastries, giving Clara a loving glance. "You should sit." "I am sitting," she smiled playfully, clearly glowing with joy. The bell above the door jingled. Clara looked up and froze when she saw who had walked in. Mark, the man who had left her just before their wedding. He held a bouquet of flowers and wore a quiet, unsure expression. "Hi, Clara," he said gently. "I read about you, about this place, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not being brave enough back then." Clara was silent for a moment, then gave a soft smile. "Thank you. If you hadn't left, I may never have come here, never met Daniel, Ethan, Emma, or this little one? She placed a hand on her belly, her eyes filled with a quiet light. I don't blame you, because that moment brought me here, to real happiness. Mark nodded, his eyes misty. I'm happy for you. As he left, Clara stood for a few seconds, her hand still resting on her belly. Daniel came up behind her, gently wrapping his arm around her shoulders. You okay? I'm good. I've never felt this peaceful. The sun was setting, casting soft light through the white curtains. Inside, children's laughter filled the space, and the scent of warm pastries floated through the air. Clara looked around, her heart beating softly with joy. It turned out the recipe for happiness wasn't about perfection. It was about letting go of the past and daring to love again with everything you have. With the past finally at peace, Clara turned back to the life she had built, not from perfection, but from healing. The sky turned pink as evening settled in. In the cozy kitchen, the scent of vanilla cookies filled the air. Emma stood on a stool, stirring the dough with tiny hands, while Ethan lined cookies on a tray, focused like a little chef. Careful this time, no burning the cookies, Clara laughed, her baby bump stretching beneath her floral apron. I set the timer, Mom, Ethan said proudly. Daniel set the table, laying out the cloth Emma had picked and a small vase of wildflowers Ethan had gathered from the garden. Everyone sit, Emma called out. Tonight's the baby celebration. Dinner was simple. Grandma's vegetable soup, crispy cheese bread, and fresh orange juice. But the food didn't matter. What mattered was the laughter around the table, the unspoken warmth in every glance exchanged. Halfway through the meal, Emma leaned against her mother, eyes sparkling. Mom, Clara. Yes, sweetie? You healed Daddy's heart with food. The table fell silent for a beat. Then Clara chuckled, pulling her daughter in close. Daniel reached out, taking Clara's hand, his eyes quietly glistening. Not just with food, he said softly, but with your love, your patience, and your whole heart. Clara looked at him, then at the two children beside her, smiling bright. And deep inside, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, that her journey back to love had come full circle. Think, she whispered, smiling, I've been healed too, by this very family. They brought the cookies to the table together, telling stories about Grandma's old recipes, about Daniel burning pancakes on his first try, and the love story that began with a quiet afternoon meal. Outside the window, the breeze gently swayed the white curtain, and inside was a dinner that felt complete, not because the table was full, but because every heart around it had finally found its home.